Hello and welcome to the HistoryNetwork.org podcast. If you'd like to become a patron of the podcast, please pop along to patreon.com/The History Network to find out about how you can become a patron. Thank you to all our patrons who make this podcast possible. The HistoryNetwork.org podcast, Season 31, Episode 2, The Battle of Marathon, Part 2. This episode was written by Murray Dahm. Murray is an ancient and medieval military historian from New Zealand, living in Australia. He has written more than 100 articles on various aspects of ancient and medieval military history, as well as other historical topics from all periods, ranging from the history of opera to the runic alphabet and recipients of the Victoria Cross. He is the author of Macedonian Phalangite versus Persian Warrior, Athenian Hoplite versus Spartan Hoplite, and Leuctra 371 BC, all from Osprey Publishing. He is a regular on the Ancient Warfare podcast. On the field of Marathon, the Persians and Athenians faced off against each other for days on end. Finally, when it was the Strategos Miltiades' day of command, the Athenians took action. Herodotus tells us that the Athenian army moved into position for the coming struggle. The right wing was commanded by Callimachus, for it was the regular practice at that time in Athens that the polemarch should lead the right wing. Then followed the tribes in order of their numbers, and finally on the left wing were the Plataeans. This is finally a satisfying chunk of text containing concrete detail for modern historians to grasp onto. It would seem as if Herodotus tells us that the battle line was arrayed according to strength of numbers. Some modern translations have regular order. There was a regular order of the tribes, philae, singular, file, but Athenian battle lines do not seem to adhere to it. There were 10 tribes at Athens, and in each battle line then men were arranged into tribal divisions or taxes, singular taxis, each one commanded by a strategos elected from that tribe. If these divisions were arranged by strength of numbers, that seems to suggest that there was no fixed order in the battle line. We gain some additional information from Plutarch's biography of Aristides. He tells us Aristides and Themistocles commanded their tribal divisions at the battle in the middle of the battle line, where the fighting was thickest. Military historians since the 19th century have been obsessed with exact troop dispositions, and in the case of this first battle in written history, we simply have to make do. Callimachus, the polemarch, was from the Hippotontis tribe, Miltiades from Oeneus, Aristides from Antiochus, and Themistocles from Leontis. We thus have the rough positions of 4 of the 10 tribal divisions at the battle. Callimachus on the right, Aristides and Themistocles in the centre, and most probably Miltiades on the Athenian left next to the Plataeans. We can suggest that Miltiades' tribal taxis was on the left of the Athenian disposition because that place was the position of second highest honour after the right where Callimachus was positioned. There were 139 demies of Attica, and the men of these were divided unequally amongst the tribes, since some demies were more populous than others. According to reconstructions, the largest number of demies in a tribe was 21, Aegeus, the smallest 6, Iantis, but on average there were 13 demies per tribe, such as in Antiochus. Leontis in the centre had 20 demies, so we have Antiochus and Leontis in the centre? Does this tell us they were the strongest, and could therefore bear the brunt of the fighting, albeit in fewer ranks? Or that they had fewer men and those tribal taxes positioned on the wings? The Athenian system was designed so that the danger was spread among the men of Attica equally. This is not so much the case at Marathon, where every man served, and Herodotus makes it clear there were some tribes which were stronger. And as far as we can tell, and the evidence is usually from later, one of the least populous file was Antiochus, and one of the most populous was Leontis. So there seems to be no help here, or corroboration, for Herodotus, since they were placed next to each other in the centre of the line in a later tradition. Oenesis and Hippothontis were also among the less populous tribes later, so this seems to offer no help. There might be a few more details we can extrapolate, but they are highly speculative. Herodotus's next 2 chapters give us the battle itself. One result of the disposition of Athenian troops before the battle was the weakening of their centre by the effort to extend the line sufficiently to cover the whole Persian front. The 2 wings were strong, but the line in the centre was only a few ranks deep. This, too, satisfies the military historian, to a point. We tend to think that the wings were 8 ranks deep and the centre 4 ranks deep, but this is a guess. Actually, evidence of exact depths in hoplite battles are very rare, and it seems clear that, just as at Marathon, they could vary in each battle, and even different units in the same battle line could have a different depth. Exactly which units were involved on the wings and the centre is unknown, apart from the Hippothontis tribe on one wing, Oeneus on the other next to the Plataeans, and Antiochus and Leontis in the centre. If 1,000 men were 8 ranks deep, then that gives us a frontage of 125 men. If 4 ranks deep, then a frontage of 250 men. Therefore, if each wing comprised of 2,000 men made up of 2 taxes, the left wing made up of the Plataeans and the men of Oeneus, each wing would be 250 men wide. The weakened centre, consisting of 7,000 men at 4 ranks deep, would have a front of 1,750 men. Arguments about how much space an individual hoplite took up vary. The consensus view is 3 feet, around 90 centimetres, a pace or a yard. This would mean that, based on the above calculations, the Athenian front would be 6,750 feet, or 2,025 metres wide. This would match the Persian frontage. We know from later sources that the Persian army also had units of 1,000 men, and they may have drawn up 10 ranks deep. If that was the case at Marathon, then if they had 24,000 men, they would have had a frontage of approximately 7,200 feet, or 2,160 metres. This very basic maths does in fact match some reconstructions of the Persian strength at the battle, though not if the Persians had 90,000 or 600,000 men. The crux of the battle comes in Herodotus's next sentence. The Athenians advanced at a run towards the enemy, not less than a mile away. No one believes today that the Athenians could have run that far in formation, in armour, and fought a battle at the end of it. Modern reconstructions instead say that the actual run was only for the final 200 yards or 180 metres, the range of Persian bowfire. Herodotus's emphasis, however, is on the valour and courage of this charge, not its prowess as a feat of athletics. He was reciting his work for a mainly Athenian audience, and the legend was perhaps more important than the details. He continues, "They were the first Greeks, so far as we know, to charge at a run, and the first who dared to look without flinching at Persian dress and the men who wore it. For until that day came, no Greek could hear even the word Persian without terror. The Persians could not believe that the Greeks would advance in such a way without the support of cavalry or archers. They thought that the Greek charge was suicidal. Surely they would all be mown down by the Persian arrows. At a conservative rate of 10 arrows a minute, the Persians could put more than 250,000 arrows into the air before the Greeks reached them, and firing one arrow every 6 seconds is a slow rate. The Persians, however, had not counted on the superior protection afforded by hoplite armour, shield and helmet. The Greeks made their run and closed with the enemy all along the line, and in Herodotus's phrase, fought in a way not to be forgotten. You can almost hear the cheers from Herodotus's Athenian audience as he read his work out loud to them. He tells us that in the centre the Persians and Saki broke through the Greek line and pursued the defeated hoplites inland from the sea. This phrase gives us pause for thought on the position of the battle lines. Most maps show the battle as running across the plain at 90 degrees to the shore. If that is the case, then this phrase must be metaphorical inland, meaning simply invasion. If the battle lines ran parallel to the shore, however, the pursuit inland makes more sense. The placement of the burial mound for the Athenian dead, the Soros, also makes more sense if the lines were parallel to the sea. The Soros is still there today, and its position is most likely to have been where most of the Athenian casualties occurred, that is, in the centre where the line broke. On the wings, however, the Greeks were victorious, so much so that they drove the Persians from the field and then managed to join up and destroy those Persians who had broken through the Greek line in the centre. They chased the defeated Persians to their ships at the northern end of the bay, where there was another fight and where several prominent Athenians died, including Callimachus. The Athenians took 7 ships from the Persians. As soon as the majority of the Persians had re-embarked in their ships, probably fighting all the way, the fear was that they would make their way towards an undefended Athens and seize the city. The Alcmaeonid family were accused of signalling this to the Persian fleet. This is a glimpse of the politics that could interfere with any military operation, and even in the glory of victory, contemporary politics would very soon find a way to intrude. The Athenian army had to march immediately back to Athens, a race against the Persian fleet. 1 tribe was left to guard the field, and the remaining 9 marched back to the city. The fleet had to traverse 70 miles by sea, the Athenians 26 miles by land, but they were exhausted by having already fought a battle. Nonetheless, they marched and won the race, arriving just as the Persian fleet came into view. This was the first marathon, although another story is of Phidippides running back to Athens to announce the victory, "Nikomen, we win," and then falling dead. He had already run to Sparta and back. Finally defeated, the Persians turned around and sailed home. They would return 10 years later with an army of 5 million men, according to Herodotus. The Persian casualties amounted to 6,400 dead. The Athenians lost only 192 men. Their names were recorded in marble on the Soros raised in their honour. The highest honour in Greek warfare was to be buried on the field. Pausanias tells us that the Marathon dead were listed by tribe, and this corresponds to surviving list fragments. We can therefore be relatively sure of the number of Athenian dead. Herodotus, though emphasizing the legend, perhaps would not have contradicted a monument which was well known and could be checked. Some historians have speculated that Herodotus's number of Persian dead neatly represents 100 dead for every 3 Athenians. The Athenians were 3 times better warriors than the Persians. Only a fragment of this list survives, a copy made in the 2nd century AD by the wealthy Herodes Atticus at his villa in the Peloponnese, which was discovered in 2000. The fragment has 22 names of men from the tribe of Erechtheus. 22 casualties from one tribe is approximately 11% of the 192 casualties suffered by the Athenians, and so not disproportionately high or low. If Antiochus and Leontis bore the brunt of the casualties based on their position, Plutarch, and the fact that they were broken in Herodotus, Erechtheus may have been close to them in order to suffer some casualties, perhaps closer to the centre, where we assume the majority of casualties occurred. Professor Spyridon Marinatos, who led the excavation of the Plataean tumulus in 1970, estimated Plataean casualties at no more than 20 men, although far fewer skeletons than that were excavated. They were on one wing, so perhaps Erechtheus could have been anywhere in the line. Many of our sources for ancient battles are dissatisfying for modern readers because they do not describe or analyse the battle in question in the way we would like, or in the way we would hope to in the same position. Instead, they give a summary of events, sometimes a highly confusing summary, and then move on to other things. Marathon is no different. The account in Herodotus is no different. After a sketchy account which has caused centuries of debate, and which includes some detail, but not nearly enough to satisfy us, Herodotus moves on to anecdotes of what happened to individuals before the battle and within it. We hear of the god Pan being seen on the Athenian side, of Hippias sneezing out a tooth, and that this foretold he would lose. He died on the return to Persia. And in the battle itself we hear of Synegirus, the older brother of Aeschylus, having his hand cut off and being killed as he seized a Persian ship, of Epizelus, who went blind when he faced a huge bearded warrior who may have been a god. These anecdotes appear elsewhere too. Pausanias tells of the legend of Echelaus, who supposedly fought at the battle with a plough, and Phidippides' first marathon is recorded by Lucian 6 centuries later. We need to remember that Herodotus was reciting his work out loud for a mostly Athenian audience, and so they wanted to hear entertaining and exciting stories, not boring statistics and dispositions. Unlike us, they all knew how battle was fought and how men were arranged and how the command structure worked, and so the details of battle, which to us are nuggets of gold, to them would have seemed pedantic and boring. What happened to old Epizelus, however, was entertaining to that audience, although to us such stories get in the way of, or more infuriating, take place of, the details of the battle. The Athenians had faced the Persians without fear. They had run at them, and they had won a resounding victory. The confidence which this victory gave to Athens, and subsequently to all Greeks, and the hurt to Persian pride, would shape Western history for centuries to come. Thanks again, Murray, for writing that excellent two-parter. If you would like to become a patron of the podcast, please just pop along to patreon.com/The History Network. Thanks again for listening. You've been listening to the HistoryNetwork.org podcast, written by Murray Darn, read by Nick Barker.